Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will improve your life. I'm Stu Reed. Here's my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hey, do we know what's happening? Because every teenager is on Facebook for hours a week. Not every, but enormous number.
Well, I know a lot of people are alarmed, including the Surgeon General of the United States, who just called for warning labels, that is, on social media, advising parents that using the platforms might damage adolescents' mental health. It's a big deal, akin to back in the 60s, Dave. You and I were around. Remember when there was a big battle to put warning labels on cigarette packages, and eventually they did. And
And it's working
yeah,
some.
yeah, a
In
drop.
fact, it's working so well, the overall US death rate has gone down because fewer people are getting lung cancer.
Okay, well, that's I think proof positive that warning labels work. I'm not sure what effect it would have on social media platforms, but something's got to be done. And according to the Surgeon General, he's asking Congress to act, and he's asking tech companies to make changes. And his whole position is that many of the features on these platforms, Dave, they push notifications, autoplay, and infinite scroll, and they prey on developing minds and contribute to excessive use. And apparently, a lot of this stuff is by design, much like as we learned later down the road that the tobacco companies were putting addictive agents into the cigarettes to make us more addicted to the product. Uh, Many folks are saying the same thing is happening with how some of these social media platform applications are designed to make them more and more addictive. And according to some of the recent numbers that have come out, something like 4.8 hours per day the average US teen spends on social media. That's a heck of a lot of time.
Yeah, that number is almost certainly, well, not almost certainly out of date, but in fact, it may be up until they get rid of TikTok. But a lot of kids are not using Facebook anymore, and a lot of adults are not using it. The actual number is down the last year or two. TikTok's taking a whole lot of it, uh, but that surprised people, including everybody at Facebook, who thought it would never change. Some things do change.
Yeah, I know. I talked to my son, who is no longer a kid. He's young 40s, but he doesn't use Facebook at all. He said Facebook is for old folks, and
Well, I'm an old
he's
folk, and I
TikTok
don't
and
look at it
Instagram.
more than once every 2 months or so.
Yeah.
And I have like 800 people there, including a lot of people who used to be good friends.
Hmm. But 4.8 hours a day, Dave, regardless of what application you're looking at, that's a lot of time to have your face in your phone.
It's very addictive.
Yeah. And a
And
lot of the platforms they're designed to maximize how much time you spend on them.
more
And
than a lot,
well,
all of them.
you said
That's
all of
what
them?
they all do.
Yeah.
They make more money in advertising the more you watch.
Mm-hmm.
So for the last 10 years, they've been figuring out ways to make it more addictive
Mm-hmm.
and for you to
Mm-hmm.
watch more. TikTok is the incredible example. Now, the Surgeon General is a credible source, and I know some of the data he's referencing. But what happened when he came out with this report is a lot of other credible people, especially from academia, and hence without a financial interest, just as the Surgeon General doesn't have financial interest, says he's wrong. The evidence isn't that strong. And it's worth remembering that there are a lot of very good things that are happening because of social media. In fact, you were talking just a moment ago about the emergency response team.
Yeah.
Is social media getting warnings out?
Absolutely is. Absolutely is. Around all kinds of things, weather events, accidents, other kinds of catastrophic events, things like shootings and other kinds of things. Social media does an excellent job. A lot of times it's reactive, but nevertheless it gets the word out there. So it's an incredible tool that way. The other thing that I've read and heard about is just how it helps folks, especially folks that may be a little bit on the fringe of the bell curve. It helps build community. It helps folks find other folks like themselves to build community, so that folks are not feeling nearly as isolated as maybe they were before there was social media. But you can't ignore the downside, Dave. I don't know that we can legislate. I don't know that warning labels are really effective. But you look at some of the bullying that goes on social media, and the number of young teens, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds that are committing suicide because of the just obsessive bullying on social media that apparently they're not able to get away from it. Maybe you and I don't quite understand that. Our teen years are so far away from where we are today. But I would think that the teen could just put the app down, close the app, not look at the app. But apparently, that's not the case. I guess you get so addicted, and you know that your friends are looking at it, and there was just a lot of abuse. And I know there's a parents group that has been formed, Kids Online Safety Act, uh, a group of parents that are lobbying Congress now. And I think there's an actual bill that's in Congress that's being marked up, being talked about, that will require social media, gaming, and messaging apps to limit features that can heighten depression or bullying or lead to sexual exploitation. And a lot of the folks that are sponsoring this
You
bill.
mean they're going to totally out of business and not leave any way for people to communicate, like those who are thinking of sexual exploitation, who are an awful lot of people in this world. In fact,
Yeah,
if you
that's
define
the
it
idea.
broadly, it's half the guys I've known who
I think
was
for me, the tricky part is, you know, practically, I don't know how you can implement these types of restrictions. Maybe there's a way. Maybe AI, Dave, can somehow help with the implementation of some of this stuff. But how do you restrict the applications so that there's no bullying, for instance? I mean, how do you do that? I mean, is that something that can be done? How can you actually block harmful content? Can you block features that lead to addictive use by young folks? If this law were to be passed, is that something, from your experience, that can actually be implemented from a technology point of view?
it can't be eliminated. It certainly can be dramatically reduced.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, I just lost you there for a minute, Dave. Lost your picture and your sound.
Sorry about that. I'm sorry to coordinate it.
So you you
Uh,
you 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 think that uh, some of this abusive stuff that's on these platforms can be mitigated, and that legislation requiring the technology companies to do so might be effective, or at least effective in some mitigation of the abuse.
I can give examples of that, but let me give you one way that almost is sure to reduce a fair amount of that abuse.
Okay.
Germany is getting serious about requiring proof that anybody logging on to social media is at least 13 years old or has direct parental authority.
Now, who's doing this, Dave?
Germany.
Oh, Germany. Okay.
Okay. And there's a lot of people who want to do that here. It's actually against the law for the social networks to take advantage of people under 13 years. As you know, because you've gone to a lot of websites and they ask you to certify you're 13 years or older.
Mm-hmm.
What they're trying to do in Germany is not merely put a rule in like that, but enforce it, insisting that Facebook sees something like proof, like a driver's license sent to them by fax, uh, to prove somebody is at least 13 years. Other people say that should be raised to 16 years. Now, getting most 12 now, any smart 12-year-old can figure out how to fake it. Remember when we were underage and wanted to drink? What did people do?
They got their cousins with a big brother's ID. Come on, all kind of ways to get around that.
And there's going to certainly be lots of ways to get around it, but most people won't.
Mhm.
And the same is true on pornography and hate and any other thing you want to filter on. They now can do a fairly decent job using AI to identify most of it and knock it off Facebook. And they are trying. On the other hand, Elon Musk thinks they shouldn't censor anything unless it's clearly against the law and perhaps and could go to a judge to get a subpoena, not a subpoena, an order. And it turns out, I didn't know this, it's not my thing. There is loads and loads of pornography on Facebook. It just that somebody writing up Facebook's rules made a point of including things that it wasn't excluded. And that made the news a couple of weeks ago, with people being very angry. And how could Musk let that happen?
Mhm.
And that's one of the many things that you shouldn't listen to our opinion. You might want to listen to our facts. You might want to listen to the opinions we bring on the air, but you're going to have to decide for yourself, especially when we're talking about kids.
Yeah, I think the Surgeon General has a very valid point, Dave, in my opinion, and that is that young people have developing minds, and we need to nurture and help them form their minds. And certain things that can be very abusive and work against their development are happening online. And for someone like Elon Musk to say there should be no censorship, okay, that's fine for adults, but what about the 12 to 18-year-olds? And I think the Surgeon General has a really powerful point that there's a lot of harm being done. Now, you mentioned that there's a lot of good too. Okay, well, so somehow there's got to be a way to mitigate the harm, mitigate all of the negativity, the abuses, and let the other stuff flourish. Now, that may be a very fine line, but I think it's a line that the technology companies need to start looking at. That's my own personal opinion. And there are a lot of folks that are pushing on the state level and on the federal level for that to happen. You know, I just want to, circle back. You said you thought that the technology is there to actually mitigate some of this stuff.
Absolutely. They're looking at it and can you get rid of hate speech? Can you get rid of examples of violence? Can you get rid of things that support Palestinians, which obviously some people want to get rid of? And in fact, the Israelis are censoring the internet big time.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, you could never be perfect on that, but you can catch a whole lot of it and just make it harder, nudge people away from it. Whether it's right or wrong, I leave that to our audience to come up with their own opinion. But I remember what you were saying before about people connecting. I remember when I was 13 years old, I was as in many schools, one of the smart kids that everybody else couldn't stand. There were about three of us, and we got a lot of hassle. Yeah, why don't I give you a dramatic example?
Okay.
When I was in eighth grade, I remember looking out the window and saying, should I jump?
No,
I
no.
didn't. I wasn't close to that, but that was because Dee Dee, a girl in my class, was leading everybody in picking on me.
Hmm.
So that I know that. But what changed it for me was two things. One, I started sounding more like a normal person, in particular by making a point of cursing regularly. And that turned out to make me much more acceptable.
Cursing as protective behavior. Okay, I get it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I had been deliberately putting in vocabulary words in my speech, and people thought that was very pretentious. But
Mm.
then it was even bigger, is I got involved with a large group of the smartest kids in New York. It was a lot of us, this was the time of the Vietnam War, that came together to fight the war, elect peace candidates to Congress. We ultimately won a few of those, but not most of them. And it got a slew of the smart kids from every top high school, including Stuyvesant and Hunter and Fieldston. In fact, my girlfriend for 3 years came from Fieldston. And these were self-selected because not merely did you have to care about the issue, you had to get along with the people there. And they were all smarter than 9/10 of the kids in my high school or most other high schools. And it gave me a group of people I could run with where I was acceptable. Now, obviously, that's an issue still for gay kids. And gay people have been finding themselves and finding their peers on the internet in enormous numbers. Does that make it right or wrong to let it all go uncensored? I'm not going to try to give you an answer to that. So let's change to another story. How good do you think all this AI is at at making music and changing the whole music business and ultimately the culture?
Well, it's certainly making a huge impact on the music and arts business. You know, we had the big theater strike last year. Movies, and theater folks, and we have heard and learned about and talked about on this show how AI is able to imitate, take the voice pattern of a certain performer and create a new song by that performer that they never sung.
How
And
good do you think it is?
how good?
Yeah, how good is that imitation of a performer?
You know, I haven't heard it, Dave, but I've read that it's very good. You know, I really can't answer that because I guess I'd like to hear with my own ears to really answer that definitively. But what's today saying to you?
Uh, I've looked at it in terms of voice reading and acting, and Jenny is actually in a professional piece using a voiceover with a stimulated voice.
Mhm.
It works. It's decent, but not good. In fact, one of her producers said, can't you get something better? And she said, sure, give me a budget to hire an actor.
Mhm.
But it is definitely possible to get something decent that sounds like anybody. Albert Einstein or Teddy Roosevelt or your favorite demagogue. Absolutely a thing that a smart teenager can do easily. And you can do it if you have a good gaming PC really well. But here is a definite expert opinion.
Okay.
Sheryl Crow is one of the leading musicians and singers for the last 20 years. She was terrified. She said she was literally hyperventilating when she heard a song over the internet. What was it? It was a song that was getting no notice or play. And the author of that song said, what if somebody famous sung this song? Would it get noticed much more?
Mm-hmm.
So the writer of that song, whose record was going nowhere, put a male voice from somebody named John Mayer, to replace her vocals. And it started getting much better attention, including from Sheryl Crow, who said, I know John, and I know the nuances of his voice. There would be no way you'd have been able to tell that he was not singing that song.
Wow.
That is how
That's
good it is.
a musician singer talking about a friend musician singer saying she could not tell that was not his voice. Wow.
Her went on to say, when they resurrected the voice of Tupac Shakur, a New Yorker who has a famous mother. You cannot bring people back from the dead and believe they would stand for it. It's hateful. It's antithetical to the life force that exists in all of us.
Somebody released or tried to put out a song by an AI version of Tupac. Is that right, Dave?
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's what Sheryl is talking about. She hated it.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen no matter what laws. Well, yeah, no matter what laws are passed, because it's so easy, you're not going to be able to enforce the laws against everybody.
Yeah.
It's like, it may have been illegal to smoke marijuana for most of my life, but that didn't mean that there are a whole lot of people who did it.
Millions and millions.
Hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
One of them said once that for 40 years he smoked a joint every night before he went to bed. That was Louis Armstrong.
Yeah. I have an uncle, Dave, that was about maybe a little bit younger than him, but he was classical and jazz musician. He lived till his young 80s and started playing when he was a teenager. And he once told me, I smoked a joint every single day of my life. And he was very successful, made a lot of money, studio musician, and he did quite well financially and taught music as well. So yeah, so you can only legislate so much of human behavior.
Yeah.
But we were talking about trying to monitor and control human behavior vis-a-vis taking the voice of other folks and making your own recordings. Dave Bernstein releasing his playing, his singing using Frank Sinatra's voice or whomever. And
it would be really hard, but I bet if you were good, you can reproduce it. As a few actual live singers have done over the years and created a crew.
There have been some great mimics. I remember Sammy Davis Jr. for one. I remember seeing him live as a youngster. I mean, he was an incredible mimic in terms of singing. It sounded like Frank, sounded like Ella. He was something special long before AI. But Dave, we got to take a break. We're about the halfway point.
Good.
Yeah.
Got plenty of other stuff that at least I think is interesting to bring you in the next half of the show.
Yeah, in particular, you had a story that you were talking about where there's stuff that a 4-year-old can do that AI can't do. And I found that really interesting, looking at that childlike behavior and learning that all the sophisticated language models apparently cannot do. So anyway.
I think about that is Read often by Jan LeCun, who is one of the half dozen most important people in the history of artificial intelligence.
Okay.
He
Well,
knows what can and can't be done, and knows that there are a lot of things that we can't do, at least for now.
okay. Well, stay tuned. We'll be back to talk about that and more on Community and Technology. You're listening to WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, with Dave Burstein and Stu Reed. We're going to take a brief musical break. Stay tuned. Okay, we're back. Community and Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reed. Before the break, Dave, I had mentioned that there's some recent study looking at the fact that there are a bunch of things that 4-year-olds can do that AI can't do. What is that about?
Well, learn to walk is one of the key ones, as well as learning language and learning how to recognize things without thousands of examples or serious experts teaching you.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that. The example that computer scientists like Jan LeCun have been using is telling a dog from a cat. That seems totally trivial and not interesting, but it turns out that it was the test that proved to the people in the field in 2012 that these new techniques, the neural networks we were talking about, really could work. There was a standard set of images that had hundreds of pictures of images of cats and dogs and thousands of other pictures that was used to test how good was the work going. And in 2012, the first neural network thrown at it seriously did better than any human had ever done.
Hmm.
And all the things we've seen since then. But that neural network had to be trained literally on thousands of examples. A 4-year-old who's seen 3 cats and 3 dogs could usually tell which is which. Okay. Now, what does it take to walk? Well, they're getting humanoid robots, and some of them actually look pretty nice. I saw one doing a handstand not long ago and jumping up. So we now can, robotics is probably about to take off. A lot of people think so. It's certainly true that you can train a robot to walk, but it's a big job and you have to be among the best in the world to make that happen and have a big budget and a lot of tools. Every 2-year-old, almost every 2-year-old at least, learns to walk by herself.
Yeah. You know, David, listening to you and looking at the story, what the big difference that I'm hearing there is that kids, young kids in particular, I guess older too, but young kids in particular, they learn by doing. They learn experientially by exploring and interacting with the world rather than being told about the world. I think that's what I'm hearing is the difference here.
Yeah, not just interacting. It turns out, and there's actually an enormous amount of work that's been done on this in the last 20 years, that much of what a baby learns is by watching and listening.
Mm-hmm.
They learn language by hearing it. They learn how to walk by watching people. This is called theory of knowledge. The psychologists have been big on it for 20 or 30 years, literally doing things. One NYU professor had a baby and recorded everything for 3 years. Mm-hmm. And had looked at how the kids actually learn. And lots of other people were doing it. And one of the hottest topics in artificial intelligence is how we can do that well. We certainly should be able to match what a kid do. So you can beat the average law school grad on a legal test with a good computer now. They did it. They took the bar exam and passed better than most human beings did. But you cannot learn to talk, learn to walk, learn to read people's emotions on their face nearly as well as a young child. And that's blowing everybody's mind. Everybody serious about AI knows that we have problems like that. But they also know that hallucinations are still really bad, and it really is holding back things. You're not going to trust, or you shouldn't trust, any AI, including the best in the world, on most medical decisions. Even though there's loads of data that shows they do it better than most doctors, and in some cases better than expert doctors, but they also get it so wrong sometimes. And I can bring sections to the next slide. So how does a computer learn? How does a person learn? Is artificial intelligence like human intelligence? these are big questions that everybody's been looking at for a long time, including Alan Turing, 80 years ago, who wrote an essay way before, 40 years before anybody could build the machine, about how you would design a Turing machine that could do a lot of this stuff. And some of the things they've realized. One is that a 3-year-old who has just opened her eyes and looked around her, seeing her mother in the hospital, seeing the cot in the hospital, seeing everything else in 3 years, takes in an enormous amount of data. We talk about the billions and trillions of data points we're training the AI on and how they can find patterns in that. Well, it turns out, depending on how you measure how much the eye is seeing at one time, it's billions and trillions and more trillions in the first 3 years of most people's life. Video and the eye can see an awful lot. And that's a lot of how people learn. Second thing, question from the beginning of artificial intelligence. Everybody in artificial intelligence who thinks about it knows that that's a terrible name. First of all, nobody has a good definition of intelligence, and all the experts contradict themselves. So how can you tell whether something is intelligent? It turns out to be hard. But is artificial intelligence a copy of what we know as human intelligence? Absolutely not. That many of the advances in in artificial intelligence, in the computer side of it, were developed by people who studied the brain, tried to understand how the brain was working, and then tried to reproduce the function on the computer, but it's wildly different. Your brain has billions and billions of neurons with incredibly complicated connections, hundreds of thousands of connections from each neuron to other neurons. We're up there in the multiple trillions on the number of connections the average human brain can make. Probably 10 times or 100 times as much as the biggest computers we have.
But Dave, now I have a question. We're talking about the computer thinking versus the brain thinking. We talked about the 4-year-olds having a certain kind of intuitive learning, if you will. And just a little bit of a segue, how is it that AI has been able to make advances in creating AI companions for people without having some of this intuitive knowledge? How does that work? We're hearing that folks are seeking counseling or seeking friends, seeking romantic relationships with AI avatars. I find that amazing that can even be possible, but apparently it is.
It's happening to millions of people, literally, who are talking to their computers because the good AIs actually can respond to you, not just in the voice of Albert Einstein or your deceased father, but in a conversational way that feels as natural as most people working. How does that happen? Well, the way these neural networks work is not that complicated in first principles. You take a heck of a lot of data, everything on the world internet, literally, trillions of data points, put it all together and do some fancy mathematics to see what relates with what and what the connections are. And since we got computers powerful enough to do that on large numbers, And we've learned some techniques that are highly mathematical. It's working incredibly well.
Mhm.
It's writing stories that get published. It's making illustrations that look an awful lot like Vermeer or Van Gogh
Mm.
or
But Dave,
anyone else.
I'm also hearing stories like people are saying that they have created a companion, an AI companion that helps them with their depression, that makes them feel better. I mean, how do you get the emotional content in there? That's kind of amazing to me.
Well, it's the same thing, actually, but I should have made the analogy clearer. Just as a computer with a huge computer with a huge amount of data and great capacities can figure out how to draw a Vermeer, a computer with a huge amount of data and a great capacity can figure out what a good doctor would say consoling somebody whose friend had just died. By listening literally to thousands, possibly millions of audios and transcripts of doctors consoling people, and is able to come up with the words that help. And how do we know that? What's the really good evidence that beyond all these studies and academic stuff? Well, it is now being used by many real doctors saying, how should I tell my patient about this? And not always getting the right answer, but saying they get a lot of good ideas. And the studies say that on average, literally comparing against doctors and something like that, it can say things or write things that are more effective than the average physician or
Okay, but
therapist.
David, not just consultation. We have people that are dating avatars. Come on, having
Well,
relationships with avatars. I mean,
and
that's a whole nother level.
I'm going to hold back on this till next week because there's an incredible story in The Guardian about people who are doing just that with so many details. I'm not going to try to summarize it into
Okay,
10 minutes.
okay,
I'll hold that for next week.
okay.
It's got another story we're
Okay,
ready
yeah,
with.
while we're talking about emotions and AI, let me go to a story about over in the UK, where at train stations, several big train stations in the UK, that'd be the United Kingdom or England, they're using AI to monitor and predict behavior in the station. They're scanning millions of faces and sending it to Amazon software to analyze it. And you know what the experts, what the people there that are controlling this are saying, hey, it's going to help reduce certain types of crime and increase safety. But you know, there's some corollary things happening, Dave. You know, they're saying they can predict and monitor platform behavior, including overcrowding, identify antisocial behavior, such as running, shouting, skateboarding, smoking, spot potential bike thieves. And in some cases, they talk about they can actually analyze and determine people's emotions and feelings.
That's a
Now,
hard one. We'll
yeah,
have to talk about that
yeah,
one.
yeah. And of course, you know, first of all, this has been done in the UK without the knowledge of the people that live there, without the knowledge of or consent of the people in the train station. It's just all kind of coming into view to people at large. And, you know, the authorities are, of course, pushing back, saying that, you know, it's for everybody's better safety and quality of life, and we're helping to protect the passengers using these systems. But you know, a lot of privacy experts and advocates are concerned, you know, about what they're going to do with this data and where it could go. And you know, you and I both know, again, talking about the so-called hallucinations that AI has, there are a lot of mistakes. There's a lot of unreliability with how this stuff works, and not sure where it's going to go, but apparently it has at least been flagged in the UK, and folks are looking at it. Um, they're talking about their games coming up. The Olympic Games are coming up this summer in Paris, and they're talking about using some of the same AI video surveillance there, Dave, to help identify what's going on with the crowd, to predict crowd surges, to look at weapons or abandoned objects and things like that, again, to help enhance public safety. And while we certainly cannot argue against public safety, there's just a bit of a gut reaction to this drive to expand surveillance in such an incredible way. And as it starts to expand and get bigger and bigger, I don't know that we're going to be able to control where it ends up. But that I think we're going to talk on another show about the use of AI as it reads emotions. And I forget the name of that movie that came out.
Let me take that away from you for a moment.
Okay, go ahead. I just wanted to mention that movie that came out some years ago. I forget who was in it. But they were arresting people based on what they thought they were going to do based on their behavior. So that's kind of where I'm going with my own paranoia and concern. But go ahead.
Yeah, and it's of course has been sort of happening already that they're using other techniques that aren't the AI like we're talking to figure out where crimes are going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out they are incredibly biased. And in fact, they're afraid the statistics on how many people are arrested and who they are now being distorted. Mm-hmm. Why? The New York Police Department has a lot of software. They were the world pioneer in a lot of this to try to figure out where the next crime is likely to occur.
Mm-hmm.
Which liquor store is going to be held up. It works somewhat, but it is an incredible bias because what do they do with that information? They put cameras and police where the crimes might be occurring in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that means that there are far more cameras and far more police in most poor Black and Hispanic neighborhoods because there have been more crimes there.
Right.
And by concentrating the police in those areas, it distorts who gets arrested and how you analyze and all the crime statistics.
Sure. I mean, you're looking for problems in one place, you're going to find them in that one place. And you're not going to find them in the places where you're not looking. Duh.
So what you're saying and why I wanted to take it away from you is that there are two questions I want to separate them. One that you've been talking about is how much of this AI surveillance and reading people affects privacy. Mm. And that's enormous, especially because something on the order of 1 billion or 2 billion people are affected by it every day. Literally every train station in China, which means 300 million people a day, are scanned by cameras hooked up to AI. Now, what does that mean for privacy? That's a good question. But the other question is, how well does it work? I recently read a fascinating book about a woman who is a world pioneer in reading faces for what do they say about emotions. She built a $100 million company that found that the ad agencies were willing to pay them to watch people who were watching commercials and seeing what they respond. that works on some things. It presumably works pretty well on saying whether somebody, which of the 2 seconds in the 30-second commercial got the most attention. And that's live and real. But she also believes, as many people do, that AI can read emotions fairly accurately. Are you laughing, but really you're angry? Is your frown fake or real? She used some stuff that was developed by psychologists 20 and 30 years ago to look at faces and figure out what emotion they were telling, and built a product around that. And she is convinced it does work well and will work really well. Problem is, there's a lot of evidence it doesn't work that well.
Yeah.
In particular, the psychologists tore apart the research 20 or 30 years ago that one of them put together on what facial gestures mean what.
Mm-hmm.
And there has been loads of experiments by psychologists and now by computer scientists to see how well reading emotions work. And the answer seems to be they work for some things sometimes, but not really as much as the people who are promoting it think.
Yeah. I'm not surprised at that at all, Dave. As an African American growing up in America, I know that my people for generations have had to wear a mask and be careful with what emotions they showed or didn't show, at the risk of losing their freedom and or life. So, I know that just looking at somebody, you may not know what the heck is going on, depending on who that person is and where they're coming from. But that's a whole other story. We're about at the end of the show here, Dave. So any final thoughts before we sign off?
It's worth knowing. It turns out that solar panels are working so well and so cheaply, they are starting to make an enormous difference in the global warming issue. The majority of capacity being added in China, strong majority today, is solar and a little bit of hydro and wind.
Wow.
That's also true of the majority of capacity being added in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
The solar arrays are so cheap, people are buying 2 of them and not putting them on the roof where they have a good run on it, but putting them on their balcony.
Wow.
And getting enough sun to generate enough electricity that they're doing it because it pays off.
Mm-hmm.
I can give you loads of more examples, but we're out of time, where solar is working so well. And in particular, the Chinese are able to produce so much of it. The Chinese press is going crazy because of the overcapacity for producing solar panels, and who would buy them?
Right. Well, all I can say, Dave, is it's about time. I've been waiting for that to evolve. I have it for a long time. Some of the science fiction that I read says that a planet is not really evolved to a basic level of technology until they're able to get all their energy from their star. And that's what solar energy represents for us. We're a long ways from that, but I'm glad to hear that there's some advances and significant movement there. Okay.
We're not a long way from saying goodbye, I think.
There you go. Okay. Okay. This has been Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Tune in. Just might learn something. Thanks. Good night.